right, welcome into Surviving Paradise, the podcast that takes a sometimes serious, oftentimes humorous look at the claim by Jehovah's Witnesses that they are living in a modern-day spiritual paradise. I'm your host, Stacy Bauman, former elder, ministerial servant, and a little guy raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses throughout the 70s and 80s. Warning, we try to have some fun here. We try to heal. We can get serious. We can get sad at times, but all sarcasm, humor, and more, never meant to offend. Appreciate you being here, especially those brave Jehovah's Witnesses who may be grappling with some feelings. We're going to talk a little bit about that this week. After many years of contemplation, I've come to the conclusion that Jehovah's Witnesses as a religion are what I call a feeler's paradise. It should come as a shock to no one that from the religion's inception, starting with Chuck Taze Russell, that most of a Jehovah's Witness life is motivated by feelings. Whether you're born into the religion or you accepted one of those famous free Bible study programs, the war between your mind and your heart, your logic and your feelings begins. It's a war of your emotions. It doesn't take long to figure out that they are regularly conditioned to believe that their world is based on the spiritual, which, dare I say it, it isn't always logical. That's the facts. The entire religion is based on the invisible, after all, on putting trust in things they can't see or corroborate. When your logic kicks in, it immediately surrenders to your emotions as a Jehovah's Witness. Some may disagree, and I respect that. I really do. However, this has been my observation and experience, and it's incredibly powerful. The proof is in the pudding, as they say. An estimated 8 million people hang on the words of 11 men they likely have never met in upstate New York, and that says a lot. They're convinced, and they've been convinced, that they speak for an invisible spirit, hovering just out of sight and playing a game of human chess with his archenemy, who is actually his own kid that he created, as our every move as a human is monitored. And in order to make our next move, we need to obey those 11 men in upstate New York. Did I summarize that correctly? Was that succinct? Have you ever wondered why this works so well? Admittedly, this is one of my favorite subjects. I'm just going to get it out of the way. I come back to it a lot because I'm obsessed with what makes us tick and how we found ourselves in this position as a Jehovah's Witness. So bear with me because it has an application in each of us, and that includes any and all Jehovah's Witness that might bravely be here. Allow me to share from people far wiser than me. Author and motivational speaker Simon Sinek, might be a name most people recognize. He's gotten real popular lately. In his book, Start with Why, he states the following, quote, "Emotions trump reason every time," end quote. The key idea of his book, Start with Why, is that, quote, "people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it," end quote. The book continues to espouse the idea that rational thinking and rationale is the weakest way of trying to get people to make or come to a decision. And it makes sense. Just think about how often you know better, yet you let your emotions get the best of you when making a decision. I shouldn't have another piece of cake. I've had 2 tequila shots. Do I need a third? I could keep going. You get the idea. But another example of this is found at Decisions Are Emotional, Not Logical, the Neuroscience Behind Decision-Making, on What Is Big Think's website, an article by Jim Camp, where he says, quote, "So at the point of decision, emotions are very important for choosing. In fact, even with what we believe are logical decisions, the very point of choice is arguably always based on emotion. End quote. Who knew? Maybe it was obvious to most, but decisions are based on emotion. They are rarely based on logic or deeper thought. And he continues in this article, he says, quote, think of a situation where you had bulletproof facts. Can you see where this might apply for a Jehovah's Witness? Backing up, think of a situation where you had bulletproof facts, reason, and logic on your side and believed there was absolutely no way the other person could say no to your perfectly constructed argument and proposal. And then the other person dug in his heels and refused to budge. He wasn't swayed by your logic. They're doomed to fail. However, because decision-making isn't logical, it's emotional, according to the latest findings in neuroscience. So at the point of decision, emotions are very important for choosing. In fact, even with what we believe are logical decisions, the very point of choice is arguably always based on emotion. End quote. And I have to tell you, after leaving Jehovah's Witnesses, if you were anything like me, we all wondered how we were trapped by all of their insane nonsense. We were trapped one way or another, frankly, because it works, and it worked on our emotions. Pictures of fuzzy animals, being told we're heroes like biblical characters, all the things that tap into human emotion. And frankly, living in a paradise is much better than having to pay your taxes to the IRS. We like it. It's the reason we like entertainment. It's the reason we let our minds drift away. The governing body has perfected their formula for tapping into people's emotions over the years. And I'm sure you can think of a few examples of this. I just reeled off a few, but how about just one more? Their core teaching, the core teaching of Jehovah's Witnesses, is a future day where you will be perfectly youthful. You'll have great skin. You'll eat perfect food. You'll be in perfect health, all on a perfect paradise earth, hanging out with your favorite animals and having lunch with your Bible heroes. And any family member that will come back to life. That's what Jehovah's Witnesses teach. And Jehovah's Witnesses are consistently encouraged to feel what paradise will be like, what a perfect body feels like. From the Watchtower of May 1st, 1968, page 259, we are told, quote, when you envision a paradise, what do you see? Does your mind's eye visualize a gorgeous garden or park? Do you see multicolored flowers, shrubs, well-kept lawns, fountains, and calm, clear pools? Do you also envision cascading waterfalls, rushing streams, lush green meadows, fenced by towering trees, and tangy air filled with the fragrance of deep woods and the songs of birds? Would you desire to live in such a paradise, free from the worries and threats of this present system of things? End quote. I'd have a free home Bible study program for you. There it is. It feels good, right? It would feel good to anybody. It's why we watch movies, why we read books. It always works. As you're swept away from your aches, your pains, your heartache, and your stress into a utopian world free of all of life's problems. It works. It's always worked. How about a more modern example of how Jehovah's Witnesses are encouraged to get into their feels? The Watchtower, April 15th, 2014, pages 3 through 7, where we find, quote, to sharpen your mental image of God's kingdom, look intently toward your life in paradise. Use your imagination. For example, when you study the lives of pre-Christian Bible characters, consider what you might ask them when they are resurrected. Uh, You can think of who I want to talk to. I got a few questions for my guy Noah. Back to the quote, imagine what they might ask you about your life during the last days. Envision how excited you will be to meet your ancestors from centuries ago and to teach them about all that God has done for them. Picture your delight as you learn about many wild animals by observing them in a peaceful surrounding. Reflect on how much closer you will feel to Jehovah as you progress to perfection. End quote. Come, drift away with us, the governing body. Picture it, imagine, sharpen your mental image, look intently. These are all things Jehovah's Witnesses are encouraged to do. And there's no logic involved. There's no logic here. Just a world of warm, fuzzy feelings. Tap into your imagination. We all know they have. Let's be honest. You're surrounded by monkeys and elephants as you bite into the perfect pear, along with your great grandfather who is wearing his first pair of khakis upon resurrection, all while you both ask my guy Noah how he shoveled all that animal shit off the ark for a year. Where did you sleep? Did it stink? Did you cuddle with koala bears at night? Where did you store all the food for these animals? On the roof? Did you go up to the roof to poop? What is Mrs. Noah's name? The questions are endless. And look, I reel that off because as a kid, I read these watchtowers. As a Jehovah's Witness, I was encouraged to, as they said, look intently, sharpen my mental image, use my imagination. And in fact, I did. You see, Jehovah's Witnesses are taught to look to a future day and drift away. Drift away from everything you're seeing. Finding a parking spot at the Kingdom Hall. Your third meeting of the week. Standing in front of that book cart as millions of people walk by and no one speaks to you. Don't do that. Drift away with us. Tap into your feelers for a few minutes. And it's all a lot more fun than doing your taxes and watching your carbs in 2025. But you may wonder what the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses' endgame is in all of this. Well, allow them to tell us for themselves. From the Watchtower of August 15th, 2015, page 15, paragraph 6, they tell us this, quote, in this world, Satan wants people to think they can do whatever they like. Many feel that it is important to be independent and that there is no need to obey God. What has been the result? Much suffering and unhappiness. But Jehovah is a loving ruler. How much better life will be in the new world when everyone obeys him. And note this, quote, in the new world, we will enjoy following direction from Jehovah's organization to help make this earth into a beautiful paradise and help teach those who are resurrected. Jehovah will have much work for us. But what if those taking the lead asked us to do something that we do not really like? Would we obey? Would we do our best to fulfill and enjoy our assignment? Note this, to prepare for everlasting life in the new world, we need to obey the direction from Jehovah's organization now. End quote. And so what's their end game, you say, or ask? There it is. The governing body is on an endless quest to encourage people to tap into their feelings. Something neuroscience in 2025 shows trumps logic when making decisions. It's a highly effective way to control people and get them to make decisions. Their feelings. Your imagination itself is a tool in the hands of the governing body used to gain control over your very emotions, getting you to obey the direction from, as they say, Jehovah's organization. That's them right now. And I'm here to tell you, it works. It worked on many of us. It's still working on some. But when I say it works, that's until, well, it doesn't. You see, we're all free moral agents, each of us unique in our own way. In fact, science estimates that each of us is a 400 trillion to 1 chance of ever existing. You are truly unique, my friend. There has never been another you, and there never will be. And with that fact comes a number of dynamics that even 11 would-be kings in upstate New York simply cannot control. And I'm here to tell you it drives them insane. Consider what Michael Levine says on Psychology Today. He says, quote, "Further study eventually led me to an article on Psychology Today by Michael Levine." This is an outside source. The article is Logic and Emotion, which delves into the logical and emotional sides of the human brain. Michael states that it is his belief that our left brain wrestles with our right each time we make a choice. He says the left and more pragmatic side tells us to act logically, while our right puts up a dramatic fight for following the heart's content. End quote. He also mentions in this article that it is said that emotions drive 80% of the choices that people make, while practicality and objectivity only represent about 20% of decision making. I know, end quote, by the way, I know, Captain Obvious. We all like to feel good. Our feelings drive a lot of what we do. It's why we overeat, let's be honest. But wait a minute. So emotion almost always wins in a fight to make decisions. But I'm asking you here to look at the 20%. That 20% of something else that may just kick in and override our feelings? Yeah. That bungee jump might look like a lot of fun, but your brain says, well, I'm not so sure about this. And we need to be thankful for that. We may always choose pizza and ice cream for dinner every night if it didn't, but somewhere along the way, that 20% of our being kicks in and tells you, well, that's a really bad idea. Or maybe it's the fact that you can no longer see your feet. I don't know. Either way, the 20% kicks in. At this point, you might be wondering, what the hell any of this has to do with Jehovah's Witnesses? Well, it does. Because you see, that 20% very likely creates something that can save you and me from a lifetime of servitude to 11 men in upstate New York. It's something anyone on the fence with Jehovah's Witnesses should openly embrace and pray that it happens to you. And when I say pray, I mean that, not the way you think. It's this little thing that pops into your head, that 20%. That little 20% is this little thing that most of us refer to in a decision process as doubts. Doubts. Doubts are real. And I want to present my own theory that doubts make up that 20% of our brain telling us, hey, listen, donkeys don't talk, neither do snakes. And well, the God of the Bible doesn't need to build a movie studio in Ramapo, New York. He didn't even have a movie theater in the temple in Jerusalem. So why does he need a movie studio? It's that little part of your brain that might tell you that. At one time or another, almost every Jehovah's Witness deals with doubts. Even the Bible writers knew that this would be a problem. And I've long found this scripture very interesting. It comes from the often forgotten Bible book of Jude, which has exactly one chapter and serves as a bit of an intro to the Bible's more famous book, its final book, known as Revelation. And I can't imagine why it was placed here, that the Bible writer wanted to address anyone having doubts right before Revelation. What could that be about? Right before the book of Revelation talks to us about pregnant women running from dragons, flying locusts, lakes of fire, gut-eating birds, and more. What is there to doubt? Come on. But nonetheless, even Jude had something to say about the inevitable. People have doubts. In verses 22 and 23 of Jude, he tells us, quote, "Also, continue showing mercy to some who have doubts. Save them by snatching them out of the fire, but continue showing mercy to others, doing so with fear, while you hate even the garment that has been stained by the flesh." End quote. Long fascinated by that verse. It seems that under inspiration, Jude was told to write down that people have doubts about all this stuff in the book, the Bible. And from the beginning of it all, people in the know were encouraged to stomp those doubts out. Is this interesting to only me? I've always found it interesting. When you're tapping into people's emotions to help them make a life or death decision on faith, we have to be sure they ignore the 20% of their brain that says, wait a minute, wait a second here. As Jude ends, we are pushed onto dragons, lakes of fire, and how trumpets all point to Jehovah's Witnesses in the 20th century in the US of A. And we will help you dismiss all the doubts you might be having. Doubts are very real things for Jehovah's Witnesses, and even the governing body knows it. Humans always want to survive and thrive. So even though pizza and ice cream taste good, there is almost always a voice in the back of your head telling you, you've had enough of this. This isn't a good idea. For a Jehovah's Witness being force-fed images of paradise, fuzzy animals, and youthful bodies, it's so damn compelling. There may be this little voice saying, wait a minute, where did Jesus ever teach that there would be a paradise earth? Have you had that experience? Why didn't he tell us to be on the lookout for a group of old, mostly white guys in the not yet discovered United States of America in a place called New York? Why didn't Jesus tell us about an organization? This paradise thing, he never mentions it. On and on it goes. All of this served as proof, at least for me, that the leadership of Jehovah's Witnesses, now the governing body, as of 2012, the Faithful and Discreet Slave, located in upstate New York, never had a good plan for sustained control. You see, when appealing to people to join them in a feeler's paradise, they ignored something every human develops during their life. Doubts, their gut, their intuition. But make no mistake, they want you to ignore those doubts. That voice you keep hearing in your head, that gut feeling that tells you something's wrong. They work very hard to get you to dismiss what comes naturally to human beings. And I'm here to tell you, if you're having doubts and you're thinking about ignoring them, don't do it. Doubts come from somewhere. Your gut, your intuition is speaking to you as a person. And modern science proves that doubts are of great value. To simply ignore them or dismiss them can bring you great harm. And frankly, once there, it's very difficult to erase them forever. Why? Because your intuition is speaking to you for a reason. From the article Go With Your Gut, The Science and Psychology Behind Our Sense of Intuition by Bianca Nogrady, we find a simple example of why ignoring your doubts can be dangerous. She relates a story or an illustration. She says here, quote, on a rainy night in London, a young woman walks towards the entrance of a side street, smiling to herself as she recalls these evenings spent with the friend she just farewelled at the train station. She's about to walk down the poorly lit shortcut that will take her back to her accommodation when she stops. Something in her body tells her not to go down that street. She pauses, then turns back towards the busy, well-lit but longer route home. Where are you going? She hadn't heard the footsteps of the man who had been walking behind her. He seems thrown by her change of direction. Instincts screaming. She doesn't answer and hurries away along the main road. Everyone has a story like this. The road they didn't walk down, the cafe they didn't go into, the time their body reacted to save them a split second before something bad happened. There are many terms for it: a sixth sense, a gut feeling, something in the air, end quote. I'm sure we can all relate to this story. Listen to your doubts. They're trying to tell you something. Something that might save you from a lifetime of misery or worse. And this is very, very important for a Jehovah's Witness. But first, proof that the governing body are constantly trying to get you out of your doubts and into your feelings. And when doing so, they always tap into the most primal of feelings: fear. We've talked about it a lot on this show. Fear is part of their cocktail. Listen in as Jesus, their boss, and his chosen guys say the following from the 2001 Watchtower of July 1st, pages 18 through 21, the article, Do Not Let Doubts Destroy Your Faith. The opening paragraph says it all about the governing body. It says, quote, one day you think you are in good health. The next day you feel ill. Suddenly you have no strength or vitality. Your head aches and your body is racked with pain. What has happened? Dangerous pathogens have breached your body's defense systems and have attacked vital organs. Left untreated, these invading organisms may destroy your health permanently, even kill you. Of course, if you are not in good health when an infection strikes, you are even more vulnerable. If, for example, your body is weakened by malnutrition, your resistance becomes so low that the least infection may be fatal, says medical author Peter Wingate. That being so, who would choose to live in famine conditions? What? Very likely, you do whatever you can to eat well and stay healthy. You probably also do all you can to avoid exposing yourself to viral or bacterial infection. Do you, however, exercise the same care when it comes to remaining healthy in faith? Are you, for example, alert to the danger posed by insidious doubts? End quote. Wait, what? I'm a Jehovah's Witness. I came to the Watchtower Library because I'm having doubts about a few things you told me, and you're scaring the crap out of me. What is this about yeast infections, bacteria, and me having doubts? What? This is the Watchtower, folks. Behold the wisdom in print of the faithful and very discreet slave. Because discretion goes from questions of faith to yeast infections that might kill you. But the point is the same. They are going to make you feel a certain way about your doubts. And I can't leave this particular 2000 Watchtower article without pointing out an irony that will now live in my Jehovah's Witness Hall of Fame. This one is so fun, where it tells us, quote, doubt, is it always bad? Of course not. Backing up. Of course, not all doubt is bad. At times, you need to suspend acceptance of something till you are sure of the facts. Religious exhortations to the effect that you should just believe and should doubt nothing are dangerous and deceptive. End quote. For a moment, you don't say. How do you know you're anointed? Just believe me. How do I know you guys were chosen by Jesus? Just believe me. I'm sorry. Back to the quote. True. The Bible says that love believes all things. A loving Christian is certainly ready to believe those who have proved trustworthy in the past. End quote. Well, okay now. Has the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses proved to be trustworthy in the past? How do we know when new light may strike? You see, 2 years ago, I was in the back of the Kingdom Hall with two elders. They were discussing the stubble on my chin. 2 years later, they encouraged me to grow it out. You never know what's going to happen. Are these guys trustworthy? Back to the quote from the 2000 Watchtower, because it just is so good. Quote, but God's word also warns against putting faith in every word. Indeed, it does. Quote, sometimes a person's past record gives legitimate reason for doubt. Although the deceptive talker makes his voice gracious, the Bible warns, do not believe him. End quote. And with that, it enters the Jehovah's Witness Hall of Fame for this crazy podcast host. Do you mean men, as an example, there it is, who claim to speak for God here on earth? We don't know how they got here or who told them they could, and well, have a very well documented history spanning all the way back to the 1800s of saying, I don't know, a track record of saying things like this from the Watchtower of 1967, April 15th, page 243, we are told, quote, the danger of sudden death is staring you in the face. That is exactly the case with the warning that we speak of here. And there are reasons why it can truly be said to be the most urgent warning ever given. It is to come within the generation that has already seen 2 world wars, and it is only a few short years ahead of us. End quote. You mean guys like this? A few short years, eh? It's been 57. But nothing like telling people in 1967, Jehovah's Witnesses particularly, that death was staring them in the face. And these kinds of track records, things in print, proofs, all certainly help to dismiss my doubts or any doubts you may be having about guys saying this stuff, right? I just read to you in the 2000 Watchtower quote, sometimes a person's past record gives legitimate reason for doubt, end quote. And I'm here to say, indeed it does, O wise, faithful, and so discreet slave, and a Jehovah's Witness that might be here bravely listening. Well, there is a reason for the doubts you may be feeling. And it's likely the governing body and this organization's long history of failures, changes, flip-flops that are happening in real time in this century, and then sudden gift-giving mood to distract you from those doubts you might be having. You know, things like giving adult men their permission to grow hair on their face, or giving grown women their permission to wear pants. That 20% of your brain that is firing and warning you that something is amiss, here it is. Don't ignore it. If you're uncomfortable hearing all this and you're putting some things together, I understand. But they themselves have admitted that doubts are real in their own words, as does their very instruction manual, the Bible. I've had a lot to say about their endless assault on our emotions and our thinking, but for someone experiencing doubts right now today, look, it's scary. It can feel scary. It's scary. Your world, everything you know, your belief system, everything you've trusted in and believed in and made decisions on, those feelers, well, that world is being turned upside down with doubts. You've got this guy, King David Splain of the governing body, claiming you should never question their building projects this month on JW Broadcasting. You've tried for hours to find Jesus explaining that generations would overlap. It gnaws at your gut that went out teaching people, you, even yourself, teaching people that the generation that saw 1914 would not die before Armageddon, and well, they're all gone. And maybe those things, it may be something much simpler. How about that the two new governing body members were born in looks like around the 1970s, or that anyone, much less Jesus, thinks that a guy like Stephen Lett is a really effective teacher, or that you don't feel loved in this organization, or that the elders ignore you. It could be anything. But where the governing body shows their true colors is in how they define and explain your personal doubts. I just reeled off a few, but it doesn't matter what you might be doubting. Again, it could be anything. We're all so different and unique. The governing body is here to put their own spin on it. Here's one example of what they do. From the July 1st, 2001 Watchtower, page 19, under the subheading Unfounded Doubts, Jehovah's Witnesses are told this, quote, yes, an honest, humble examination of the facts to establish the truth is often called for. This, however, is not the same as allowing unfounded, damaging doubts to develop in our mind and heart, doubts that can wreck our firmly established beliefs and relationships. This doubt is defined as an uncertainty of belief or opinion that often interferes with decision-making. Do you remember how Satan infected Eve's mind with doubts about Jehovah? Is it really so that God said you must not eat from every tree of the garden, he asked? End quote. They seem to dismiss the fact, of course, that she was talking with a snake and it was talking back to her. That might have gotten her attention. Back to the quote, the uncertainty created by that innocent sounding question interfered with her decision making. Not very subtle. That's me. Quote, that is typical of Satan's methods. Like the so-called poison pen letter writer, he is skilled at using innuendo, half-truths, and lies. Satan has destroyed countless wholesome, trusting relationships through insidious doubts planted in that way. End quote. The inference is simple to see. You don't want to be like Satan, do you? You don't want to be like that dummy Eve who somehow fell for a talking snake, do you? The fact that she didn't run to Adam and said, hey, that thing you named a snake, it's talking to me. No. They use this line of reasoning even when something you've seen or heard is a documented fact. They try to pass it off as innuendo or a half-truth, even when it is a documented fact, getting you to lean into the 80% of your feels and the 20% that's telling you, well, it's right there in print. One more example. Watchtower, February 1st, 1996, Trust in Jehovah and His Word is the article. We're told this, quote, another sly tactic of the devil is the sowing of doubts in the mind. He is ever alert to see some weakness in faith and exploit it. Any who experience doubts should remember that the one behind such doubts is the one who said to Eve, is it really so that God said you must not eat from every tree of the garden? Once the tempter had planted doubt in her mind, the next step was to tell her a lie, which she believed. To avoid having our faith destroyed by doubt as Eve's was, we need to be vigilant. If some tinge of doubt about Jehovah, His Word, or His organization has begun to linger in your heart, take quick steps to eliminate it before it festers into something that could destroy your faith. End quote. Did you note that doubts aren't from that 20% of your mind that you were born with? They're from Satan. Satan gave you doubts. It's like his year-round Christmas gift. That's bad too. You see, you should be doubting that Jehovah, His Son Jesus, and all those angels who witnessed human creation somehow need that movie studio to save the rest of mankind from impending doom that they themselves are going to inflict on us. It makes perfect sense, right? That doubt you might be having, well, it often falls under the heading of what most people would call common sense. Why does God need a movie studio? Huh? Why is He making movies? Didn't He create everything? Is a movie the best way? Okay. For example, if Jehovah needed a movie studio to teach us all about Moses and the Exodus, why didn't Jehovah just get involved in the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston in 1956? It was an award-winning movie. He could have got his message across through that movie way back in the 50s. Why did he wait? Why is he just now getting involved in the movie-making business? 20%, not in the fields. What does the governing body recommend a Jehovah's Witness does if they are having doubts? From the same Watchtower of February 96, paragraph 7, it says, what can be done? Again, the answer is to trust in Jehovah and His Word. So earnest prayer to Jehovah is the first step. End quote for a moment. Never mind, apparently, if one of the doubts is, does Jehovah exist? Does this prayer thing work? Their answer is to just do more of it. Just keep doing it. Back to the quote, then do not hesitate to ask for help. Here it is. Sorry, folks. Quote, then do not hesitate to ask for help from loving overseers in the congregation. They will help you trace the source of your doubts, which may be due to pride or some wrong thinking. End quote. Wait a minute, what? In other words, if you're having doubts about the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses, just go to the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses for help, even though they're the very ones you're doubting. Does that make sense? And your doubts are likely because you personally have some deep character issues. According to the Watchtower, you might be prideful and arrogant for thinking about anything without them involved. For anyone doubting this is from the Watchtower Library. Please go look it up for yourself. The governing body's suggestion for dealing with doubts about Jehovah's Witnesses and their organization is to go to them anyway. They'll talk you through it. A lot like when you're doubting buying that car and the answer is to ask the salesman why you're doubting. The salesman. It's insane. And look, we've all been there. We didn't catch this stuff either, but there it is in print. If you're doubting anything about Jehovah's Witnesses, just go to them and ask them, even if it's them you're doubting. When dealing with doubts, the governing body returns to the very thing that always works: our feelings. As I noted earlier, science says 80% of our decisions are made with our emotions. There's no need to listen to the 20% of remaining brain space that's telling us otherwise. So if you don't think the governing body is calculated, you've always wondered, do they know what they're doing? Do these guys really know what they're doing? If you don't believe they're calculated in what they do, I'll hope you will consider these facts. If their warnings and suggestions don't convince you that they have all the answers, then consider what Jehovah's Witnesses are told happens to those who don't deal with their doubts properly. And by properly, I mean talking to them about your doubts. The Watchtower of June 15th, 2006, page 22, Focus on the Goodness of Jehovah's Organization, tells us about a guy named Emmanuel. Are you ready? Quote, Emmanuel, for instance, was a witness who found fault with some things he read in the publications of the faithful and discreet slave. End quote. For a moment, you don't say. Who's this Emmanuel? I'd like to buy him a beer. Back to the quote. He stopped reading our Christian literature and eventually told the elders of the local congregation that he no longer wished to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses. End quote. For a moment. We just got counsel to go to these guys, the overseers. I've got doubts, go to them. Apparently they're not very effective. They didn't help Emmanuel. He could see through it that 20% of his brain was speaking pretty loudly. So he leaves. Back to the quote. Here it comes, folks. Within a short time, however, Emmanuel came to realize that the teachings of Jehovah's organization were correct after all. He contacted the witnesses, admitted his mistake, and was reinstated as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. As a result, he again became a happy man. End quote. Emmanuel. He could see that generations don't overlap. He could see that Miracle Wheat wasn't a good idea. He heard that Judge Joe had a mansion that resurrected people never showed up to. I could keep going. He wondered why pyramids played a role in 1914. But then he realized, well, maybe they're right after all. He came back, and the whole time he was gone, he was really unhappy because when he came back, he was then a happy man again. An experience from the Watchtower. And by the way, your doubts should be kept to yourself. You're not allowed to communicate them to anyone again but them. It continues, quote, what if we are tempted to murmur because of having doubts about certain teachings that Jehovah's people hold in common? Then let us not be impatient. The faithful slave may eventually publish something that answers our questions and clears up our doubts. It is wise to seek the help of Christian elders. End quote. Do you mean the elders Emmanuel went to that didn't convince him, causing him to leave? Those guys? The same guys. They don't seem very good at this, but go to them if you have doubts. It's incredible. A truly absurd experience printed in their literature. I could drone on for an hour with this one, but I won't. But Emmanuel's happiness, there's that feeler's paradise thing again, was all dependent on not doubting the men in New York. He came back to Jehovah's Witnesses and became a happy man again. We don't know what doubts Emmanuel had. They're not shared, or if he is even a real person, but some food for thought. Imagine Emmanuel, had he left in, say, I don't know, 2020 during COVID. He just couldn't go to another Zoom meeting. He figured a few things out with nothing more than Google. And because he just couldn't shake the fact that, well, I keep seeing all these illustrations and I know he was Jewish. Jesus had a beard. And I just don't think Jesus cares about facial hair. So he left, only to return in 2025 because, he wanted to be happy again, to a kingdom hall filled with all the guys wearing beards. He isn't even allowed to be right about what he was doubting back in 2020. He just needs to shut up and be happy. He's a Jehovah's Witness again, and men now have permission to grow hair on their face. The doubts are real, folks. There's a reason you have them. Then there is the heartbreaking matter of those that have spent their entire lives as Jehovah's Witnesses. It could be, and it's the case with many people, it was for me, that they've been suffering with doubts for many years. Maybe they actually took the governing body at their word that the generation of 1914 would actually not pass away before Armageddon. Lord knows it was rammed down our throats and still available on the Watchtower Library. You can see it in all its glory. They wouldn't go anywhere. You're all going to see it with your own eyes. Well, folks, the people that actually believe that, they need to shut up about it now. Stop talking about it. Stop bringing that up. From the Watchtower of October 2024, pages 24 through 29 feature the articles, How to Overcome Doubts. They know they're real. It says this, quote, later in life, some could think back and wonder whether they made the right decisions. Perhaps they decided to give up a promising career or a successful business in order to serve Jehovah more fully. Now, time has passed, perhaps even decades. They may see acquaintances who pursued secular interests and who now enjoy apparent financial security and are volunteering free labor at Bethel. Sorry, that part was added. Back to the quote. As a result, they may wonder, were the sacrifices I made for Jehovah worth it? Or did they cause me to miss other opportunities? End quote. Valid questions, dare I say, doubts. And you know how they solve these kind of doubts? They just let the clock tick until those generation of people have died. And people forget about it. This is undoubtedly being addressed in 2024 because, well, my generation that grew up with these core doctrines, we'd get to see Armageddon, we'd never die, all that stuff, we're still here. And I got to tell you, unless I'm really confused or in the Matrix, I'm not walking around speaking Hebrew in the nude on the back of a pet camel. And more importantly, those doubts about this organization having the truth, well, they seem to be clawing their way back into people's minds in 2025. This article in October of 2024 continues with this thought. Page 26, paragraph 10, How to Overcome Doubts is the subject. It says there, quote, did they cause me to miss other opportunities? That's the only part I'm going to reread. The answer is yes. And folks, this is what happens when you ignore what your brain is made to do. Getting out of the 80% of the feeler's paradise and into the 20% that says something's wrong. When you look to those, you're doubting to extinguish the very doubts, you run into a problem. You're simply pushing off the inevitable. And it literally sounds absolutely absurd when you say it out loud. But if none of this convinces you, and let's just pretend you're a Jehovah's Witness bravely here and doubting, if none of this convinces you that your doubts are legitimate, how about some words of wisdom from governing body member, formerly known as governing body member Anthony Morris? And sorry, he's no longer on the governing body and has virtually disappeared. But, well, this is awkward. Apparently, we're still not to doubt that he was chosen by Jesus at some point and he just got laid off. What if Tony one day became a focal point of Jesus' earthly organization, suddenly disappearing? Would that create a few doubts? Does that leave you with a few doubts as to his appointment, who put him in that role, why he got laid off? Apparently, the very guy that may have created more than a few doubts in Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'll tell you, I've heard many people say that Anthony Morris was the reason they woke up and started addressing their doubts. Would you be surprised to know that that very guy, former King Anthony Morris, has a few things to say about doubts? And it's all still valid despite his disappearance because, well, his comments on doubts are still featured in the Watchtower Library. From the August 1st, 2012 Watchtower, page 29, Champions of the Truth is the article. The talk, Rid Your Mind of Doubts, says this, quote, that was the theme of the talk given by Anthony Morris of the governing body. The Bible never links faith and doubt as belonging together, he said. Faith repels doubt. Satan succeeded in planting doubts in the mind of a perfect woman, Eve, so he can plant doubts in our mind. Feed your faith, and doubts will starve to death, Brother Morris said. He drew attention to the account of Peter, who walked over the waters, but then, on looking at the windstorm, got afraid and started to sink. Yeah, I'm sure that's why he started to sink. Look at that windstorm. I'm pretty sure if you're walking on water, you're looking down, but never mind. Back to the quote. After catching hold of him, Jesus said, why did you give way to doubt? As busy as you missionaries will be in full-time service, others may be impressed at all that you do, as though you were walking on water. But when storms hit, do not give way to doubt. End quote. The illustrious king, former king, known as Anthony Morris, formerly of the governing body. If you can't take his advice on your doubts, well, he also gives some great advice on liquor. Just watch for it online, hit the Google. According to Tony, by just ignoring those doubts, it will be like you and I are walking on water. And I'll just say I agree with him because, frankly, if you are able to ignore what your gut is telling you about generations overlapping and that Jesus Christ himself can't wait to have his own movie studio on the very planet he is set to throw fire at, well, you really do believe in miracles. Go ahead, give it a shot. Walk on water. Here's some advice. Bring a swimsuit. My advice. If none of this type of counsel from the governing body or this organization works to extinguish those doubts, and it won't, they then continue with advice like this. The Watchtower of May 1st, 2009, page 8, under the article, Face Your Doubts. We're told, quote, even Jesus' disciples at times gave way to doubt. In fact, the Bible describes lack of faith as the sin that easily entangles us. The Apostle Paul wrote, faith is not a possession of all people. Not that some are incapable of exercising this quality. Rather, many do not work to acquire it. You see, it's about you again. Quote, God will bless the efforts of those who do. End quote. If you have a pen and paper handy, and if you're driving, please don't do this, please feel free to copy down their solution to anything you doubt. Or you can reference this in the Watchtower online library. I'll quote it again, May 1st, 2009, Watchtower, page 8. Here is the governing body's solution to those having doubts. Quote, how can you overcome the challenge? Identify issues that cause you to doubt. For instance, the disciple Thomas doubted that Jesus was resurrected, even though other disciples said that they had seen him. Thomas wanted proof. The result? Jesus provided him with the evidence he needed to have strong faith. By means of the Bible, Jehovah God provides the answers we need to remove our doubts. End quote. There it is. They've said to come to them if you're doubting even them, and then they've said go to the Bible if you're having doubts. There it is. Using this divine logic, if you're someone who's doubting, I don't know, that the Bible is self-inspired by God or that it should be such an inspiration, well, the answer is just like the organization's answer. Just read it more. If you're doubting that the organization is God's organization, just come to them and talk to them about it. If you think the Bible might just be an old book that has some benefits but isn't inspired by God, well, just read it more. If you're using that same Bible to try to find things like a governing body or an organization or Jesus mentioning a paradise earth or shunning people or building movie studios, well, I'm here to tell you that I've been there, done that. And I'll tell you that reading the Bible without a watchtower was indeed very eye-opening. I encourage it. And I am here to tell you it did remove my doubts. I arrived at an obvious conclusion about Jehovah's Witnesses and their leadership, and by extension, the Bible itself, by just reading the Bible. I encourage it. You don't need any websites. They're all beneficial. Not all, many are beneficial. Just read their stuff. But if you're a Bible believer, let's say that you are, and I respect that, I think it's important to point out that Jehovah himself is aware that humans have doubts and includes several examples in its pages of Jehovah, the God that many believe in, patiently providing proof, solid, substantial proof for what they were doubting. For example, we get an account of Abraham pleading with Jehovah about Sodom, and if he just finds 50 people, 40 people, 10 people, will he save them? You can find it in Genesis 18. Jehovah answers. How about Gideon in Judges 6 with his wet fleece test? The fleece is wet, the ground is dry. Vice versa, Jehovah soaked it. Gideon kept doubting, so he made the fleece dry, but the ground wet. And then Gideon got it. Doubts be gone. What about Job, doubting God loved him as he sat there rotting, his wife blowing up at him and his kids killed? There are many more examples if you follow the counsel to just read the Bible. But you will notice something about your book when you do read it. It only involves a single person and a God. There is no mention in any of these accounts of doubters about an organization or a collective group of men in upstate New York. It isn't there. Please read it and discover it for yourself. I love this subject. All of this is to say that doubts are real. They appear for a reason. If you're feeling them, they're real. It's the very mind we are told Jehovah gave us, trying to warn you about things that may not seem obvious in the moment. Quoting an Inc.com article from October 8th, 2019, we're told, quote, when a Stanford psychologist conducted a head-to-head test between more rational decision-making strategies and going with your gut, there was no contest. Intuition led to the best choice 68% of the time, compared to a 26% success rate for more head-focused strategies. That's a blowout. When it comes to analyzing our complex world, experts warn your gut is a risky guide. But when it comes to personal decisions, like where to move, whom to marry, or which job to take, science proves nothing beats intuition. Literally. End quote. If your gut, your intuition is speaking to you about Jehovah's Witnesses, listen to it. Don't dismiss it. Remember, despite what you've been told by Heaven's 11 in New York, Jehovah of the Bible, if you still believe that, is okay with you questioning things. He's okay with resolving doubts. As always, I point every Jehovah's Witness to the only Bible verses they need to break free. Romans 8:38 and 39. Having doubts about this organization will not remove a spiritual person from God's love. You still have it. Why 11 men that claim to speak for that same God are so sensitive to you having doubts about their organization? Well, now that is a question you should spend much more time digging into. Listen to your doubts. I want to thank you for joining me this week. Wherever you may be well.